I have the honor of introducing the Reverend Daigan Gaither, and do I have that pronounced perfectly correctly?
Close enough.
Okay, Daigan Gaither. Started practicing in '95 in Vipassana, or insight practice. He and I were talking a little bit about that beforehand. It's interesting. And then he started to study Zen in 2003. Received lay ordination in '06, priest ordination in 2011. He's also a sister of perpetual indulgence. I asked him, once you're a sister, you're always a sister. So the sisters themselves have I'll speak as a person who doesn't really know, but a set of rituals for becoming a sister, and apparently no exit path. So,
kind of like a gang.
You can't step out. Volunteer caregiver with Zen Hospice Project since 2003. Nationwide speaker on sex, sexuality, queer identity, gender. Sat on a number of boards of community organizations serving marginalized communities. He's lectured at colleges as well as conferences featured in Sex, Sin, and Zen by Brad Horner. He's spoken with us before, and we're delighted to have you here. And before you commence, just so we know, we're starting a new theme today. And it's, what's love got to do with it? And so Daigan was not here for the conversation, but we had this interesting talk at one point. We were looking at a Buddhist altar and noticing everyone looking so kind of chilled out, calm, serene, really peaceful. And I had happened to have come from a Catholic church not too, just a half hour or so before. And Sister Teresa was there, and I think that there were arrows flying through her in the depiction I saw. Lots of pain and blood, and we just started talking about what's going on. These are really different messages that these altars are giving. And that led us to talk about love and passion and the open heart. And that brought us to our theme. So we have not structured the speakers for this month at all. We've actually asked them to speak riff, as they say in jazz, openly on this theme and speak to the heart of Buddhism in terms of practice, in terms of the Dharma, anything. But it's up to them. So you got a wide open, you got an open runway. So please and welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome, and it's nice to see so many familiar faces. It's actually it's funny because I really did try to sort of think about art and all of that stuff, but I'm not really an art guy. So I thought, what kind of guy am I? And so we're going to talk about sex. And I want to talk about sex in context of the precepts. I'm not so interested in I think we all know how to do it. At least I hope we do. But let's think about why, and let's think about maybe how we feel about that. And so I want to talk about sex, and I want to talk about precepts, and I want to talk about energy. It's interesting because I just came out of a 7-day sesshin, which for those of you who don't practice Zen means I sat 11 periods for 7 days. And then I went to dinner yesterday with some friends right afterwards, and we were sitting around the table, and our waiter was really cute. I mean, really cute. And it was really funny because I sort of noticed this, and my friends sort of went, "But you're a priest." And I thought, so? And we started talking about desire. And so I really am going to lead with that. Because I think that if you really want to study passion and desire and attachment and aversion, study sex. If you want to achieve enlightenment, the Buddha tells us, and I practice a form of Zen that was started by this guy named Daigan. You called me Daigan this morning when I was walking in. And Dogen says to study the Buddha way, to study Buddhism, is to study the self. And I think if you really want to study the self, look at your sexual energy. So, I'm not a big fan of right and wrong. There's a right way to do it, a wrong way to do it. I'm not a big fan of this is not okay. I think a lot of us come to Buddhism because we had a lot of messages, particularly those of us who are gay, a lot of messages about what's right and what's wrong. And I for one, am not a big fan. And that includes desire. Like we come to Buddhism and all of a sudden we hear these stories, right? Celibate monks and, the Buddha leaving his wife and kid and cutting off attachment, cutting off desire, cutting off all this stuff. And I think that, and then we get here and people don't talk about it. Like that's the other thing I've noticed, is that we don't really want to talk about it. And so it's hushed up in some form or another. I'm also not a big fan of hushing up. For those of you who know me, I've got a big mouth and use it quite frequently. So I'm going to start with a story. The story actually is told by Reb Anderson in his book, Being Upright, which is a study on the precepts. In Zen Buddhism, our vows are talked about in terms of precepts. They're not rules. They're goalposts. The idea is that you're probably going to break a few, or all of them. But we just keep trying, and we keep trying, and we keep doing our best to follow these guidelines. One of them, the third precept, is the one about sex, and it says, I vow not to misuse sexuality. And then my question has always been, well, what does that mean? What does it mean to misuse sexuality? I am a gay man who came out in the mid to late 70s and had a lot of fun. Take that as you will. I have a friend who used to say that I wasn't slutty, I was just really generous. So, for me, it was really important to sort of think about what does it mean to misuse sexuality. And so Reb tells this story, and he says, there's a famous Zen story about a monk who was offered just such an opportunity about not misusing sexuality. There was an old woman in China who had supported a monk for over 20 years. She'd built a little hut for him and fed him while he was meditating. Finally, she wondered just what progress he had made in all this time. To find out, she obtained the help of a girl rich in desire. I think that means she's hot. Go and embrace him, she told her, and then ask him suddenly, what now? The girl called upon the monk and without much ado caressed him, asking him what he was going to do about it. An old tree grows on a cold rock in winter, replied the monk, somewhat poetically. Nowhere is there any warmth. I have a really smart-ass remark about Zen monks and poetry, but I'll save that till later. The girl returned and related what he had said. To think I fed that fellow for 20 years, exclaimed the old woman in anger. He showed no consideration for your need, no disposition to explain your condition. He need not have responded to passion, but at least he should have evidenced some compassion. She at once went into the hut of the monk and burned it down. And I think that's what we think when we come here and we hear these things about cutting off desire. We think that desire is this horrible, horrible thing that we're not supposed to experience. And I don't know about you, but I think about what I want almost 24 hours a day. What I want plays a prominent role in my life. And it's not so much about not thinking about what I want. It's about how am I relating to those thoughts. What's my relationship? I think that Buddhist practice is really about relationships. My relationships to you, your relationship to me, my relationship to my thoughts and my ideas, my relationship to my story about you, my relationship to the really cute waiter, my relationship to all of that. Because really, that's the only thing I've got to study. So I make a joke about the fact that when I start sesshin, we always have this sort of coming together at the beginning, and we all sit in the big room and introduce ourselves and receive the admonitions for sesshin. And I use that time to pick who I'm going to have a crush on for sesshin. If you've ever sat for 11 days, it gets really boring, and it's fun to have fantasy. And when I really am tired of the stories in my head, I can fantasize about the person I've had a crush on. And it happens almost every sesshin. I fall in love with somebody, have a lovely time with them, and then they open their mouth at the end of sesshin and it goes away. And at first I used to go to my teacher and be like, oh, I can't get rid of these thoughts. I'm just, I keep doing this thing. And he's like, so? What is it to do that? What's the mind that falls in love with somebody as soon as you calm down? What's the mind that uses sexuality and desire as distraction? And that's one way to understand it. So you can start to sort of look at, instead of using desire as a distraction, I can start to look at what's desire. When I'm sitting on a cushion and my knee hurts, the instruction is to go and study the pain in your knee. So when I'm noticing desire, what happens? What am I desiring? What am I attracted to? What am I thinking about? Am I trying to escape my mind? Am I trying to escape my situation? Am I trying to not feel what I'm feeling? Which I think some of us do a lot. I do it. I don't like what I'm thinking, so I'll think about something else. And oftentimes it has to do with a man. Or my idea of a man. I'm old enough now that I don't even need the person anymore. Like I have created in my mind enough fantasies to last me for the rest of my life. And that guy is always perfect. I have another friend, and we joke, we're both widows, and we joke often about the fact that our husbands have become perfect. He no longer farts in bed. He no longer leaves his dirty underwear under the bed, because he's dead. So what is it? So he's my favorite sort of go-to fantasy, because I can remember some really great times. And it's not even necessarily about sex. When I study my desire, what I notice is 9 times out of 10, it has very little to do with sex. It has to do with loneliness. It has to do with my desire to connect with someone because I think that I'm separate from them. I think that you and I can't be intimate. I think that somehow you're separate from me, and the only way for me to recover that separateness is for us to become sexually involved. That's the story in my head. Usually the separateness means I'm lonely, And my way of fixing lonely has always been, we live in San Francisco. It's incredibly easy to get laid here. So instead, look at the desire. See, that's the other thing, right? So we have desire and we think, okay, I'm going to fix it. I go out, I get it satisfied, and then there's nothing left to study. Right? Until it comes up again. Because it will come up again. So, I would say, to study this, to study what it means to have desire, study what it means to feel separate. It's not to say don't have sex. Wait 5 seconds. Wait an hour. See what it's like to not be fulfilled. What story do you create about that? I also want to talk a little bit about sex in terms of harming. And, our main vow in Buddhism is not to harm other people. Buddhist websites are full of do not harm. In Zen we say protect and sustain life and relationships. And I think that a lot of times we're confused about what it means to harm people. Because 2 people agree to do something, that means nobody's getting harmed. That's not always true. I've agreed to lots of stuff that harms me. I've agreed to lots of stuff that harms you. I really, really encourage you to think about what it means not to harm. And think about it without rationalization, without judgment. Without saying, oh, this is bad. This is the right way and this is the wrong way. But really look at it in a cleaner way, with a mind that says, both are adequate. Don't set up another form of dualism. Don't separate yourself from your own feelings. Don't separate yourself into right and wrong. Just study it. What does it mean not to hurt anybody when I'm engaged in a sexual encounter? Does it mean that anonymous sex is bad? No. There are ways to have anonymous sex that are not damaging. There are ways to be non-monogamous that are not damaging. There are ways to engage in SM behavior that are not damaging. All of that is great. What's important is to study it, to be honest with yourself about it, and really look at, why am I doing this? What is happening here? Reb also says, he's talking about sexual greed. This idea of hurting people, he puts it in terms of sexual greed. I'm not a big fan of the word greed. I think it misses the mark, and we've bastardized it in English, and it doesn't really serve. And he says, self and other are seen as separate. We project reality upon the separation. We think that we're really separate. From a belief in the reality of this perception, the peaceful mind of the oneness of self and other is obscured. This belief wounds our consciousness, and the wound is a source of anxiety and pain. A powerful impulse arises to reunite the split mind. If this other were really other, then we could live without being in union with it. If this other were really other, then we could live without being in union with it. But because it is not really other, our yearning is very strong. Sexual greed is powerful because at its root is this deep pain of separation. So when we're with someone, can we look at them as not separate? When we take the Bodhisattva, we do a full moon ceremony. Some of you have witnessed that. Mostly it's a lot of bowing. And when we do that, we recite our vows, and behind every vow becomes this, the person running the ceremony follows it up with some kind of admonition. So when we say, I vow not to misuse sexuality, the person running the ceremony says, not one, not two. And now I can't remember the rest of it. Because I was thinking about something else. But not one, not two. What does it mean to be not one, not two? And how do I not hurt you in the process of being not one, not two? The first step in reversing this process is to face our woundedness and greed to whatever extent they exist. So all those ideas about separateness, all those ideas about right and wrong, the best place to start is to look at, why do I think that's wrong? Why do I think that's broken? Why do I think that's not Buddha? I think desire is a magical thing. I think passion is an incredible gift. I think love is amazing. I think having the hots for somebody is really fun. All of that can be really, really healthy and can be really great. When we can do it with some honesty, with some integrity. And so now I've told you what I think. But I want to hear what you think. Albert.
Well, I want to say a couple of things. One is that I can turn this off because I'd like there to be a frank discussion, and I don't want anyone to feel inhibited.
I would appreciate that, actually.
So I think I will turn it off.